Good afternoon, and welcome to our weekly show here in the Authentic Married Woman. I am your host, Karen Seitz, and I am a coach and a mentor for married women to teach them how to take their walls down and how to be responsible for their happiness so that they can actually have the marriage that they always wanted and always dreamed of. And today I'm joined by David Cope, founder of A New Life Center. Hi, David. Good to have you here today.
Hi, Karen. Nice
Hi.
to be here. I'm looking out my window and it's snowing today here.
It's very snowy in Denver today.
It's lovely. My name is David Cope. I'm a co-founder of a New Life Center with my partner Peggy, and I got involved in relationships and wanting to find out what it means and how to have a loving and intimate relationship with another person, a partner. After I got divorced in the year 2000, I thought I realized I didn't want to be on my deathbed, wishing that I had a loving and intimate relationship because it was really important to me. So after my divorce, I was studying and reading books and what makes a loving and intimate relationship, and I discovered it was kind of doing all the things I was doing when I was married that didn't work. And I came onto this realization that in order to have a loving and intimate relationship, I have to have it with myself first. It seems kind of obvious, and we all know that. But when we're in a relationship, we get so intertwined with our partners and lose ourselves, and we forget. And we want our partners to do that for us. And of course, if we don't love and have a connection with ourselves, nobody can give it to us. So that's kind of what the foundation of our New Life Center relationship course is all about, is building a connection with yourself. So you're not dependent upon your partner to make you feel good or loved, that they just add to what your own feelings of feeling loved and being able to meet your own needs, and then your partner doesn't carry the burden of trying to do that for you. So Karen, can you talk a little bit about our guiding principles in our Facebook group and our course?
I can. These are always good reminders. I need these myself in my
Mhm.
own marriage and in my own life. And we like to start each video reminding you of these guidelines so that you can start to see them and how they apply in your own life and how they can maybe work for you. And the first principle is that you are responsible for your happiness, that there's nothing anybody can do, including your husband or your family or anyone else or anything else, that can make you happy. That happiness is an inside job, and we have to do the hard work to build self value within
Mm.
ourselves to be happy. And that when we're able to do that, we can then bring that happiness into our marriage and share
Yeah,
that with our husbands.
I'm just going to interrupt because
Sure.
when I was married, my wife always said to me, "I'd be happy if it wasn't for you, David. You need to change
Mhm.
your behavior, and then I'd be happy."
Yeah.
And I worked really hard as a good man, trying to do everything I could to try to make her happy, and it never seemed to work. And after my marriage and end of my divorce, it came really clear to me that I never could have made her happy. It seemed like such a duh moment after my marriage, is if somebody isn't happy within themselves, their husbands can't make them. There's nothing they can do, and it seems so obvious now. But when you're in the middle of a marriage and you have all these things going on constantly, it's very easy to forget that for the women listeners, that your husband is not responsible for your happiness, and he is not the source of your unhappiness. So
That's
thank you, Karen.
a great point. And I could add on to that, but I'm going to keep rolling so we can get
Thank you.
into our topic.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah.
I love that you added that. It's a good point. And so the second principle is that the only person that you have any control over to change is yourself. And
Mm.
we all know that, yet we all get really caught up in the trap of constantly exerting our efforts trying to change our husbands or try other people or change other people. And it never works because we have to be the ones to change ourselves if we want to experience change in our marriage or anywhere else in life. And that puts us in the driver's seat and empowers us. Sometimes that can feel really daunting and like a hard
That's
pill to
true.
swallow. But that actually allows us to create the life and marriage that we want when we really understand and know that. And the third guiding principle is that, and to got confused with our old name, our that an authentic married woman, what that means is really having a relationship with yourself and
Hmm.
feeling good about who you are. And how
Hmm.
we do that is by taking responsibility for our happiness, discovering who we are, knowing what we like and don't like, and then showing up as ourselves, vulnerable as who we are in our marriage and with our husbands without our walls. And it seems crazy, but that's actually the mechanism that's going to solve the issues and challenges in your marriage. And it
Hmm.
links right into what we're talking about today. And
That's
our
true.
title is How to Instantly Have a Meaningful Connection with Your Husband. And today we're going to be
Wow.
talking about vulnerability.
Wow.
Yeah.
So kind of the reason why we're doing this is because we posted, Karen, you posted a quote from
Yeah.
Brene Brown. And Brene Brown has always been intriguing to me for how her perspective and clarity on vulnerability. And the quote, can you read me the quote, Karen? That
I
this,
can. Staying vulnerable, meaning taking down our walls, is a risk we have to take if we want to experience connection.
yeah. So the reason why I thought we should do this call today is it's very easy for us to read a quote and say, "Oh, I get that. That's really nice. That's very meaningful."
Yeah.
But it's another thing to take the quote and apply it in your life, and what does it actually mean? So what we're going to do is kind of dissect Brene Brown's quote and how the women that are listening can actually apply that and what it means in a very pragmatic way in their marriage with their husband. Because it's easy to think, oh, of course, you need to be vulnerable and to be to risk that to take and to have, excuse me, staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we want to experience connection. But the hard part is to actually do it and to be vulnerable and to realize that the reason why you don't have a connection with your husband in your marriage is not your husband. It's you as a woman who isn't willing to be vulnerable because she has her walls up. And that's the reason why you lack a connection with your husband is because that you aren't willing to be vulnerable. So
Yeah.
what we're talking about today is what does it mean to be vulnerable in a marriage and why women don't want to be vulnerable and what's at risk. And to realize when we do these videos, we want the women that are listening to see themselves in the discussion we're having so they can identify it as something that they can work on in their marriage. Because as we say in our tenet, the only person you can change is yourself. So in each of these videos, we're trying to identify some behavioral pattern that you can identify and understand that it's a common experience among women. And then if you change this behavioral pattern, it's something you can control and be empowered to do to change your marriage without being dependent on your husband to change him, because as we know, that's not going to happen. But what we do realize in a New Life Center over the years of working with hundreds and hundreds of women, when a woman drops her walls and is vulnerable in the relationship, the relationship with the husband instantaneously changes,
Yeah.
and it's almost magical, but it makes sense. If you're not willing to be vulnerable, and vulnerability is directly correlated to connection with your partner, then if you're not vulnerable, there's no connection. And it makes sense if I become vulnerable, if I learn how to by dropping my walls, then I can begin to have the connection that I so desperately feel is lacking in our marriage.
And I think it's a good place too, David, to remind our listeners and the women watching that we have our walls up and we push away and avoid being vulnerable, not because we're malicious or there's anything wrong with us, but because we've been hurt so much throughout life, just through life's experiences and
Mhm.
through relationships. And so we get scared and we go into protective mode and we put walls around our heart because we don't want to get hurt.
Mhm.
And I know for me, my walls at one point were 30 miles long and 30 miles high, and nobody, not even me, was knocking those walls down. And so it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to step in to do the work, to start to take your walls down so that you do understand and can experience what true vulnerability is.
Thank you, Karen.
Mm.
Um, we're going to put a link to a Brene
Yeah.
Brown video. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the video is about?
Yes, so Brene Brown was giving a talk somewhere, and David found a little clip of it on YouTube. It's about 5 minutes long. And she's talking about how we often put a negative connotation on the word vulnerability, that
Mhm.
we associate it with dark, negative emotions. We associate it with things like loss or a feeling exposed or feeling wrong or feeling humility or being humbled. And so we put a negative meaning on that. And so we avoid it. And in doing that, we
Mhm.
put our guard up and we put our walls up. And she very clearly articulates how, in order to experience a lot of the good emotions in life,
Mhm.
like joy and empathy, and to experience creativity and innovation,
Mhm.
those are all vulnerable processes. So we have to open up to being vulnerable. And she just does a really good job of explaining that in a very simple, relatable way. So we will post that in the comment section
Mhm.
of this video so that you can watch that. Just sometimes it's good to hear the same thing from different
Mhm.
angles so that you give yourself the best shot at really understanding it and letting it in and
Mhm.
knowing how to apply these things that sound so, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. I get
Yeah.
that. That can be really hard, as you were speaking about, David, to apply and really know.
Yeah. And part of the strategy that we teach is teaching women how to drop their walls and embrace being vulnerable, and teaching them how they have to change their perspective and understanding about life so that they're willing to do that, because it's very daunting and difficult initially. Can you read some of the reasons why women don't want to drop their walls so they can begin to see in themselves, if, if that when you read the list, maybe they can see themselves in the list and realize why it's so daunting for them to think about being vulnerable. And remember, without being vulnerable, you can't have a connection with your husband. So it's it really makes it crystal clear that having a connection with a husband starts with the woman. I know that sounds, well, what about the man and why can't he do this and how come it's always about the women? But the reason why we say that is because these videos are for women.
Yeah.
And if we had a video for men, we'd be talking about different things. But for women, you can't change your husband, and women so much want to change their husband. Men don't have that same need as women do. Often women get married because they think they can change their husband, and men just don't think that way. But women often think that the husband needs to change, or they need to change their husband. But what we're trying to share is that you can only change yourself. So if you can only change yourself, then you have to identify the things that you have in your own power to change, and one of them is to drop your walls and be vulnerable so you can have a meaningful connection with your husband. So what are some of the reasons women have for not wanting to drop their walls?
We will have to live, meaning in every moment, in every choice, there will no longer be a way out. And that way
Uh,
out is in quotations. Whenever something gets hard or difficult, or I need to face something vulnerable in
yeah.
my marriage, my walls and my blame and putting it on my husband, that becomes my way out. So I don't have to deal with it and I don't have to make any choices and face
Mhm.
myself. We will need to be accountable. All of us will be exposed, and we can't hide the parts of us that we use to push people away. And
Can,
we have to
can,
see the nasty parts of ourselves.
can you say that in an I statement?
Sure. So one of the reasons that as women we don't want to put down our walls is I will need to be accountable.
Mm.
All of me will be exposed. I can't hide the parts of me I use to push people away.
Mhm.
I must see the nasty parts of me, the parts of
Mhm.
me I don't want to see or don't want to know that are there.
Mhm.
Another reason is I will be confronted with me, the entirety of me. I will be whole and nothing is missing. Another reason is there's nothing to defend myself against. I have no defense to the wrongs. I won't survive without defense.
Well,
And the last reason is I can't be soft. I only know hard, rough, and impossible,
mhm.
cold. What is soft? I am impervious. If I am soft, I will be weak and unprotected.
Mhm.
That oftentimes we have a
Yeah.
very negative view of what it means to be soft, that we
Mhm.
think if we're soft then we'll just be bulldozed and ran over and
Taken
completely
advantage of.
unprotected.
Yeah.
Yes, and so we think we need to be hard and strong and stubbornly set in our ways,
And have
which,
an edge.
yes, having an edge. I did some work on having an edge this week. and and we don't realize that our softness is really where our strength is,
Yeah.
where we have the ability to make choices to support ourselves
Yeah.
and make healthy choices in our lives. And Peggy, one of the founders of a New Life Center, has a beautiful definition for soft, that soft is actually strength without fear.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So it's as a reminder to women, working with women for over 10 years in relationships and individually, we women begin to build their walls, as Karen was saying, as a protective mechanism because they feel like they'll be taken advantage, and their walls give them the edge and the hardness to protect them in life and going out into the world, and that's where they perceive their strength comes from the edge, because that's how they take care of things and make things happen. And they feel that if I don't have my walls up and I don't have my edge, that I will be taken advantage of, and my underbelly will be exposed, and everybody will be there to take advantage of me, and um, I'll be exposed as a fraud for which I know I am inside. So because that's the way our mind has perceived that, it's very difficult for women to understand, well, why would I want to drop my walls? That's where my strength comes. That's where my protection and my edge, that's what protects me and makes me accomplish the things that I can. And it's a hard to understand that when you drop your walls and become vulnerable, the truth of who you are can then come forward, your authenticity. And I hope you can understand that with your walls up and not being vulnerable, there is no authentic nature of yourself being exposed. It's all being protected. And then when your walls are down, you can be authentic and true to yourself. And if you can imagine being authentic and true to yourself, you have an inner strength and confidence that is your inner protection, that you don't need your walls and your edge to protect you, because you are able to have a sense of security and confidence in with yourself that is in itself your own protection. And by knowing who you are, by dropping your walls, you have confidence in making your decisions from a strength of your inner knowingness and authenticity.
And also knowing that we have the strength and the courage and the ability to move through difficult situations, that
Mm,
that we have that capacity, and it comes from within me and me just being myself.
Yeah.
And then I'll know how to navigate that. I'm not shielding from the realities of life that yes, there are millions and millions of challenges that we go through in life or hard
Hmm.
experiences. And if we're constantly shielding ourselves or trying to walk on eggshells to avoid those situations in life, then we never learn or realize that we have all the ability and all the resilience and all the strength within us to move through those different challenges.
Thank you, Karen. Can you give the listeners some of the examples of a way to be vulnerable in their marriage so that give some examples and maybe you can help them understand why these things are vulnerable. And remember, in order to be vulnerable, you have to drop your walls.
Yeah.
And what the reason why I was saying for women listeners is these are ways in which you can practice being vulnerable is without vulnerability, Brene Brown says there's no connection. And I hope it's logical that when your walls are up and you put pushing people, your husband and other relationships away from you, that's often the way I see women explain their relationships is that I have everybody at arm's length and I don't let anybody in, and it's consistent over the years working with hundreds of women that that's how they experience themselves. So when you drop your walls, you're actually letting your heart hand down and letting people come in and connect with you. If you don't allow people to connect with you, then I hope you can imagine how there can be no connection with other people. And a challenge in most marriages is having empathy for your partner and your husband. And Brene Brown does a wonderful job of explaining when you're not vulnerable, when you have your walls up, you have no capacity to have empathy. And most women pride themselves on being empathetic and that they are tuned to others and their feelings. But it's really clear when you watch Brene Brown's video that without vulnerability, without with your walls up, you have no capacity of empathy because your walls keep you from truly putting yourself in the other person's shoes to feel what they're going through because you have your walls up, you're not being vulnerable. You don't want to feel that yourself.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about some of the things we discussed that women can be aware of things they can do to be vulnerable
Yeah. And
in a marriage?
I like what you said, David. In order to do these things, you have to be vulnerable and to
Yeah.
experience that meaningful connection. We have to be vulnerable in these things, not doing these things with a hidden agenda,
Yeah.
but showing up as myself, willing to take the risk that my partner might not understand or might pull away, or that we might actually have
Empathy.
meaningful connection. I was
Yeah.
sharing with David as we prepared for this call that I told myself, and I know this in working with many other women as well, that I told myself, oh, I want connection, I want
Mm.
intimacy, I want to feel loved by my husband, when deep down I didn't really want that because I felt so unlovable within myself
Mm.
that it was terrifying and incredibly vulnerable to think of letting another in and having them be close and intimate with me.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing so heartfeltly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we don't realize those
Yeah.
things because we're so convinced that that's what we want, but deep down we're
Mm.
terrified of that.
Yeah. Thank you.
So these are ways that we can be vulnerable. And again, that's showing up as yourself, willing to be exposed, willing to take a risk, saying, I'm sorry,
Mm.
genuinely. And that requires being able to have empathy, to understand what your husband might be experiencing and how
Mm.
you may have said or done something that was hurtful or dismissive or disrespectful, and having the integrity within yourself to catch those things
Mm.
and then being able to say, I'm sorry. I hurt you and I want to do better next time, and acknowledging that and really meaning it, not just the flyby. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Or I used to always try to apologize to get my husband to see it my way. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry I did this, but do you realize you did this and then that made me act that way?
Yeah.
So there was this hidden agenda. That's not vulnerable. Vulnerability is taking accountability for your actions and being willing to say, I'm sorry.
I remember I often hear women say, I say I'm sorry just to get the conversation over with."
Oh yeah. Yeah. Or like, let's just move on. I'm sorry. Can we forget about this? And
Yeah.
then secretly we harbor our
Yeah.
resentment or
Yeah.
whatever it is from that situation. Another one is communicating about sex, being willing to have a conversation with my husband and maybe switch things up or say, I'd like to try this. And then the vulnerability comes in me
Mhm.
experiencing myself and facing the uncomfortable feelings or things that are kind of come up with me within that and being willing to stay myself. A lot of
Mhm.
times, myself and the women I work with, a common issue is we lose ourselves or disconnect during sex. And
Mhm.
so being vulnerable to communicate and actually be there and experience yourself.
Can you say
And
that again, Karen? Because I don't
I think so.
think a lot of, no, you said it really well. I don't think a lot of women are honest, or maybe not, haven't taken the time to be aware. But a very common theme in working with women over the last 10 years is that women check out during sex.
Yeah,
And women might not realize that that's what they're doing, because they may, oh, I love sex, I'm really engaged in it. But at a
yeah,
deep fundamental level, a very consistent over the years with women is they check out during sex.
yeah.
Can you repeat what you said again?
I think so. That that being vulnerable either in communicating in sex or in having sex is a willingness to be yourself. And
Mhm.
what we haven't seen or don't want to see or just haven't had the context to be able to be honest with ourselves about this is that we often lose ourselves or
Mhm.
check out during sex. And some ways that you can know that if you're like, well, I don't know if I do or not. If you're constantly making it about your husband or what you think he wants,
Mhm.
or what you need to do for him to get something back in return, that's a good sign. Or if you're lying there thinking to yourself, I just want this to be over. Is
Mhm.
he done yet? Or are we
Yeah.
done yet? That's a good benchmark that you're checking out or losing yourself during sex.
Okay.
Um, Another way to be vulnerable, and this this is many women's issue, this is my issue, is initiating sex. So I went to a place in my marriage where I pushed sex away and I didn't want to have sex anymore because I didn't want to be vulnerable. And so now, as I'm taking my walls down and being vulnerable again and re engaging with sex, is initiating sex. And that's really vulnerable because I have to slow down enough to make a choice for me that I
Mhm.
actually want to have that experience for myself and with my husband, and not just doing it because I think I'm supposed to, or this is what I should do, or this is my obligation as a wife, but actually being there for myself and allowing me to experience me and then share myself with my partner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Can
So
you have just a little segue that we actually have a wonderful course on sex that we teach at
you
a New Life Center? What's the fundamental principle of our sex course at a New Life Center as a
is
woman?
it completely flips things, and I will use one of my examples because I have it handy here. But sex is just another way to expose the unresolved issues and fears and insecurities in ourselves,
Hmm.
because sex has been a vulnerable process throughout our lives that we have gotten hurt and heartbroken through, especially as women, because we make sex an emotional experience. So we've stuffed a lot of those feelings and a lot of those insecurities down. So sex can be a wonderful window into ourselves to heal those unresolved issues
Hmm.
and learn about ourselves and get to know ourselves and build a relationship with
Hmm.
ourselves. So I often use the example, and I have three pencils here. We want to make sex something totally different because it's taboo. We've connected so much meaning and external value to it and have made it mean about anything and everything that it is not. That
Hmm.
sex is just another way to experience myself. And I often say, so there's been some things in my life that have stretched me outside my comfort zone to shake up my insecurities and doubts and fears. One of those
Hmm.
things was Toastmasters, which is a public speaking course for adults. Um, Another one of those things, which is still looming and I've dipped a toe in, but is scuba diving, which is
Hmm.
something that I'm interested in, but
Hmm.
terrifies me. And another is sex.
Yeah.
There's no difference between the three. They all take me outside my comfort zone and stir up the issues and insecurities in myself
Hmm.
that are just me, that gives me the opportunity to work through those things. And so that's what our course and the foundation is about. And that was such a relief to me
Mm.
because I always made it about the physicality of sex and got all the books on tantra and different positions and all the things and that just made it more daunting. When I had a new avenue to see it from a new perspective, that it wasn't about the physicality, it was about
Hmm.
how I felt about myself and the things I tried to stuff down and not face. It really allowed me to open myself up back to sex and my marriage and to me. And it didn't have all that pressure and it wasn't the big giant elephant in the room anymore. So it's really freeing. So,
So if
yeah.
there's any women that are interested in, they can just
Yeah,
private
shoot me a
message you
private message
and
and
you can,
we'll have a conversation and see if it's a good fit, or at least help you get
yeah,
clear on what the
yeah,
real issues are in your relationship with sex. Because
yeah,
we have a lot of stories about what those issues
yeah.
are, and that's not the real problem. And we can help you get clear on that. Yeah.
Okay, nice little side.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what else is on the list about ways that
Ways
women
to
can
be
be
vulnerable.
vulnerable in their marriage?
Having tough conversations. And
Yeah.
one example of that is having tough conversations about money and following a budget. And a tough conversation is not when you're being vulnerable, is showing up being yourself and not trying to get your husband to see things your way and make
Yeah.
yourself right.
Hmm.
Having a tough conversation with money, especially in me and my history and my marriage, might be showing up very vulnerable with my husband and saying, I'm
I have a lot of
overspending.
debt.
Yeah,
My credit cards are full.
yeah, I had secret debt from my husband, and I know that there's ladies out there watching that have that too. It's really common. But I had a lot of secret debt. And a vulnerable, tough conversation was me showing up with my husband, not with my walls up,
Mhm.
willing to risk whatever the conversation was going to look like and saying, I've got debt and I'm not being responsible with finances and I need to take ownership of that and can we work together to come up with a plan to support me so that I can show up better in our marriage and saying I'm sorry.
Excuse me, I think I'm gonna sneeze.
Oh,
Uh-oh, don't sneeze.
live
Yeah,
bloopers.
yeah. Ooh.
Uh, so that's a tough conversation. It's taking accountability for yourself, not pointing fingers. It's saying, hey, this is an issue. Can we talk about it to
Yeah,
try to find a solution?
yeah.
That's a
Beautiful.
tough conversation.
And
And
some people might not understand tough conversation, but
yeah,
another way is not avoiding conflict.
yeah,
A lot of women are conflict avoiders. They think their husbands are, but most women that I've worked with over the years, they'll do anything to avoid the tough conversation, the conflict that whose intent and purpose is the resolution of issues, and
I am
that's
a
very
conflict
valuable.
avoider.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another one is this is one I'm working on right now is losing weight.
Um,
And you might wonder why would that be vulnerable? Well, for myself and again many of my female clients, it's very common and normal for us as women to put weight on in our marriages or in relationships. It becomes a barrier between ourselves and our husband. It is a wall and it's a way
mhm.
to push them away. For me, it's a way to make myself unattractive so that my husband wasn't attracted to me or didn't want to have sex. As you know now, that's one of my bigger challenges and issues. And so right now I'm actually committed and working on myself and losing weight, and that I have put on an excess of 40 pounds since I've gotten married. And that's, I know for myself, has been a way to keep my husband away and to push him away.
So, Karen, thank you for being so open and sharing your vulnerability. Can you share the other side of the vulnerability? What are you afraid will happen? How do you think you'll be exposed without your weight? It's a really good way to explain what's on the other side that you're afraid of that might
That,
expose you when
like
you
him
lose your
being
weight.
attracted to
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
that he might actually be attracted to me and desire me and want more affection, to want more sex. And if those are the things that I've been hiding from,
hmm
then by losing weight, those are the things I'm going to be re-engaging with even more. And my mind says, oh, he's just going to want sex all the time. And those are my stories to keep
yeah.
my weight on. And so that's why it's vulnerable on the other side is
Yeah,
my husband might be attracted to me, which is interesting because that's what we say we want. I
yeah,
want him to desire me and be attracted to me. But I know for myself, the small, the infrequency of which I have lost weight in my relationship. I say, "Oh, I want my husband to be attracted to me," and then I lose some weight and he is, and then I'm not happy because the very thing I thought I wanted now is
yeah,
making me feel vulnerable, and now I think that's the thing that's making me unhappy. He's too needy. He
yeah,
wants too much.
yeah,
I don't have anything left to give. Those are
yeah.
the things that go on in us.
And also, Karen, can you share why another reason why you put on weight that would help the women understand
Oh,
why it's vulnerable?
yeah, so another reason that I put on weight, I think this is where you're headed with this, David, is that I don't feel good about myself.
Yeah,
That I putting on weight is a way to not feel good about myself.
exactly. Yeah,
So think of all the ways we beat ourselves up as women for not being the perfect size or not having too much weight on. It's a way we beat ourselves up and feel bad about ourselves.
yeah.
And the
And
reason we want to do that sounds weird, and this is very unconscious, but we do that so we don't have to be exposed in life. I often said I can use weight as an excuse to get out of almost anything.
mhm,
So part of me and my professional life is speaking and giving presentations, or when I have weight on, it's like, oh, I'll wait until I lose a few more pounds before I get back up on stage. Or with sex, I'll wait till I lose 10 more pounds until I want to, until I feel good enough to have
mm,
sex.
yeah.
So we use it
Thank
as a
you.
huge buffer in life. And when we do that, we don't feel good about ourselves because deep down, we know that we're limiting ourselves and hiding from life. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the next one is that you can be vulnerable with in your marriage is having me time,
Mhm,
setting aside some time for yourself to do the things you love, to do the things that make you happy.
mhm,
And a lot of times that's vulnerable because in a marriage, and we've talked about this several times in other videos, is we get enmeshed in our husbands and we lose ourselves. So a common issue in marriages as women is we might be spending all of our time with our husbands or all of our time with our kids and our kids' activities.
mhm.
And so it can start to feel really vulnerable to rock the boat and take some me time and make yourself a priority. And it's important when we talk about this to know that that's meant to be done in a non selfish way,
Yeah,
in a way that you're taking care of yourself and filling yourself up so that you do have plenty to give to your life, to your marriage, to your kids. Because if you're not taking me time and making yourself a priority in a healthy way,
mhm,
you're going to feel run down and burned
yeah.
out and not have anything to give to your kids and to your marriage.
In one of our videos, we talked about why women stay so busy.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why they stay so busy is so they don't have to slow down and have me time because they become martyrs. I'm so busy. I have not enough time for everybody. There's no time for me. So it becomes, kind of a martyrdom way of looking at things. And it's vulnerable to slow down and say, no, I have to have me time because then you're being exposed as, oh, I have time to fill myself up and have time to give to others because when you're going really fast and that there's no time for you give your time to everybody, there's no you or know me, you get exhausted and depleted, and you have a sense of I give and give and give, and nobody's there to give anything back.
Yep.
And it's vulnerable to have me time because you can't have that story as an excuse and be the
Yeah.
victim.
And then you also, another good point in what you're saying, David, is then if you have me time, you might have to face the uncomfortable feelings or issues within yourself that you've been running from
That's
being
right.
busy. So a lot of times just me time in itself, not just initiating that in your marriage and having that be a new thing if you've been spending all your time with your husband, but then actually getting to that part where you have alone time and you have me time, that is a vulnerable process in itself, being
Hmm.
alone with yourself and building that relationship with
Yeah,
yourself.
beautiful. That's right.
Yeah. So last one, and this is such a good one, is actually being happy. That being happy is a vulnerable experience in your marriage,
Mm.
especially when you've been so unhappy and blaming your husband for your unhappiness. That what we know and what we have found over years of research and working with men and women and understanding the differences between men and women
Hmm.
is that a good man really just wants the woman that he is with to be happy. And when he knows she is happy, all is good in the world and
Yeah.
all is good in life and all is good in the marriage.
What do
So if
they say? Happy wife, happy life.
yes, or I like the other one too. If mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. And we know that and
Yeah.
we make jokes about that, but we don't realize the depth of the truth in those statements, but we get it all wrong, thinking it's your husband that's supposed to make you happy, like happy wife, happy life, that if he can make you happy, then you'll have a happy life. And what we're sharing is no, you've got to be the one to make yourself happy. And yes, that's the magic pill. It takes hard work. It's not
Why
an
is that
overnight
vulnerable to
thing
be happy?
because then your husband knows you're happy and you have nothing left to control and blame and be up in arms, and you will actually have meaningful connection because he will feel safe to connect with you
And,
when you are
and
happy.
and it's vulnerable to take responsibility for your own happiness. That
It's,
it's only dependent upon you. That's
it
very
is.
vulnerable not to realize that I can't blame anybody else for my unhappiness. It's solely my responsibility. That's very vulnerable.
Yeah, and then
So
knowing if I'm happy, then knowing if I'm unhappy, then there's something I've stopped doing or something that I'm not
yeah,
doing to take care of myself.
it's
So it's
about
not on
me.
my husband,
Yeah,
it's on me.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
So can you kind of wrap up, Karen, for
yeah.
all day? What was the message that we're trying to communicate today?
That a few things. One, the title of our video, How to Instantly Have a Meaningful Connection with Your Husband.
Hmm.
The answer to that is to drop your walls and to be vulnerable. And that we wanted to highlight the quote from Brene Brown that staying vulnerable, meaning taking down our walls, is a risk that we have to take if we want to experience connection. Really helping you to understand what that means and how to show up vulnerably and how to take risks in your marriage and in your life to just be yourself
Hmm.
and face the issues to face your life and take it head on. And from that place you can have meaningful connection, because if you have your walls up, you are pushing people away and keeping them at arm's length, and there can be no connection in that. You also can't be connected to yourself if you
Hmm.
have your walls up. And one of our main key principles and um, guiding principles is that in order to be an authentic married woman and to have the connection you want, you have to have a relationship with
Hmm.
yourself. And that cannot happen if you are not being vulnerable and taking down your walls.
What's the myth we were busting today? We forgot. Do you remember?
A little late in the game,
I'm
but I think
sorry.
no, I forgot too. I think so. That it's our husbands who are not vulnerable and have their walls up. We hear that quite a bit.
And it's my
Um,
husband. The reason why there's no connection in my marriage is my
yeah,
husband.
yes. And
And what
what we
do
know to be true is there's no connection if we have our walls up because
yeah,
we're guarding and protecting
yeah,
ourselves.
yeah.
And the tough piece about this is that you have to actually experience taking your walls down and stepping in and willing to go first in order to experience what we are saying is true. Otherwise, you'll continue to have the excuses and no, it really is my husband. And why should I drop my walls? X, Y, and Z has happened,
Yeah,
our scorecard.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and so in order to really understand and apply, you have to be willing to step in and take that risk
yeah. That's what
to,
Brene Brown says. The
yeah,
key word is a risk.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
you have to
have
be
to,
risk going first. That in itself is vulnerable.
yeah, it
Yeah.
really is
I
because you
most
don't know how it's going to
yeah,
go.
yeah.
But the thing is, you can't know what your marriage can be or what your relationship with your husband
Mm,
can be like until you drop your walls. So
indeed.
if you're and
Yeah.
being vulnerable, and so if you're hearing this and you know this as you, or you're curious and you're not really sure, but you'd like to find out, then private message me and let's set up a time to talk, and I will help you get crystal clear on your walls and how you prevent yourself from being vulnerable and the steps you can take your walls down and to cultivate and find your happiness within
Hmm.
and create the marriage that you always wanted. So I would love to talk. And if we're a good fit, we can talk about that too. And if not, that's all right. You will get more
Yeah.
clarity out of this call
Mm.
than you've gotten in a really long time. And like I said, you can private message me and we'll find a time.
Well,
So thank you,
thank you,
David.
Karen.
Yeah,
Appreciate it. It's always fun to share this with you, and I appreciate a new life center. What's always important to all of us is that we're true teachers, that we actually practice in our lives and in our relationships the very things that we're teaching. And
yep.
I'm very proud of Karen and the vulnerability that you share and work with in your marriage, and the commitment to keep pursuing to being true to yourself and dropping your walls in your marriage, and
Yeah.
how
It's
the
an ongoing process.
yeah, but the beauty is that you can teach other women the benefits of it, and that you're actually doing that and seeing the benefits and teaching other women. And I know some of the women tell you that they get more out of the session time they spend with you than they have in 10 or 15 years of counseling. And
Yeah.
I'm very pleased that you're a true teacher and that women have the opportunity to learn and grow from your own vulnerability and experience. So thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for
Yeah.
watching, and
See
we'll
ya.
see you next time.